This recording is an introduction to my audiobook, audio course of Caesar's Invasion of Britain. This is a text that was put together in the early 1800s, published in 1830 by John Taylor, the publishers to the University College London, and it's on a plan that was promoted by the English philosopher John Locke, who was a bit disturbed that the traditional method of teaching Latin that had held sway for millennia around this time was being replaced by a grammar method, something that's very similar to what you might find nowadays in a textbook like Wheelock. This grammar-based method had its origins in Germany, and Mr. Locke thought that it was pernicious and actually ended up stopping the student from learning the language properly. Because, as he points out, you don't learn a language from grammar, you learn a language from exposure to the language itself. And the way Latin had been taught was through text, simplified text, Aesop, etc., which were then explicated in the classroom, discussed grammatically, and so on. So what he's done here is he's taken Caesar, and as though the teacher were teaching it in a classroom in this pre-Germanic, pre-philological period, so goes the commentary. Let's have a look at it. I'm just going to read a little bit from Book 4, following the system that's used in the audio book, and then I'm going to read over again the Latin-only section. The way that a text like this works is that you're supposed to listen to it a few times in the Latin, English Latin, until it's very familiar to you. And then after you've done that, you go and listen to it in Latin only, over and over again, until you know it, until the text makes perfect sense to you. If you are studying AP Latin, or you are a teacher who is about to study AP, to teach AP Latin, then I think that you might find that these resources are quite useful, either as a student or indeed as a teacher. So let's start Book 4. Exigua parte aestatis reliqua, a small part of the summer remaining. Exigua parte aestatis reliqua, Caesar, Caesar, etsi, although, etsi, in his locis, in these places, in his locis, hiemes sunt maturae, the winters are early. Hiemes sunt maturae, quod, because, quod, omnis Gallia, all Gaul, omnis Gallia, vergit, inclines or turns towards, vergit ad septentriones, to the north, that's to the constellation that points towards the polar star, the North Star, ad septentriones, tamen, yet, tamen, contendit, he resolves, contendit, proficisci, to proceed, to go, proficisci, in Britanniam, into Britain, in Britanniam, quod, intelligebat, because he understood, quod, intelligebat, feromnibus, almost in all, it was that almost in all, Gallicis bellis, the Gallic wars, Gallicis bellis, auxilia, help, auxilia, subministrata inde, supplied from there, subministrata inde, nostris hostibus, to our enemies, nostris hostibus, and so it goes on and on. As you can see, the translations are extremely literal, and within the translation, the grammar and grammatical structure is contained. What I'm going to do now is go and read this section in the Latin only. Exigua parte aestatis reliqua, Caesar, etsi in his locis, quod omnis Gallia ad septentriones vergit, maturae sunt hiemes, tamen in Britanniam proficisci contendit, quod omnibus ferre Gallicis bellis hostibus nostris, inde subministrata auxilia intelligebat. And so you can see that the arrangement of a Latin in the Latin, English, Latin slightly differs from that in the actual text. The idea being that in order to rapidly get to grips with the grammatical structure, it's perfectly acceptable to slightly rearrange the Latin so that it can match more or less an English construction. But once you've gone through the text in this way, learned the vocabulary, learned the grammar, then you spend your time listening and re-listening over and over again to the Latin-only section, which is in a separate audio file. So the idea being that you achieve expertise in this text, you take possession of it through repeated listening, and repetition is extremely important. If you read any of the Renaissance texts that deal with language learning, well, they are all about repetition. Have you repeated your lesson? Have you memorized the material? Have you gone over it again? And certainly if you wish to get to grips with Caesar very quickly, then the audio material I've produced will help you do that. And if you are a teacher who plans to teach Caesar, or if you are a student who's going to be doing Caesar for AP Latin, or if indeed you are just a student studying Latin for your own whatever pleasure, then these texts produced by John Taylor and then later on by Hamilton are extremely useful, and I highly recommend them as a means to jumpstart your Latin and rapidly get yourself into original Latin authors. On my course, I've put this text in intermediate level because of the Latin, English, Latin help that's available, even though the text we are dealing with is an original Roman author, and so the actual text is actually quite hard. Because of the method that's used, it becomes accessible even to a student who is merely an intermediate student of Latin. So that's this text. I hope that if you do decide to use it, you find it useful. Bye.